But yes, it's Stephen Konya, kind of like Stephen Curry, the basketball player, for anybody who follows basketball. So anyhow, I got a chance to talk with a lot of you yesterday and last night, and unfortunately wasn't able to spend the morning with you today, which I'm really disappointed in. And I really want to thank all of you for taking time out of your week, out of your day, out of your month to come to Boston, because I know a lot of you do not reside here, some of you do. But I know what it takes to step away from work and immerse yourself in a program like this. And it's not for everybody. I actually spoke with somebody yesterday. It was their first time coming to an ILN event, and they didn't get it. They were like, I don't really know. This is kind of touchy-feely. It just doesn't really make sense to me. I don't know how to contribute. I don't know what to do with this information. And they left. And that's okay, right? Because it's not for everybody, and some people it just doesn't click with. But for all of you who are here today, who did participate yesterday and spend time this morning in all those breakouts, those unconference sessions and those open sessions, it's because you do get it. Because you do want to go back to your systems, to your organizations, to your communities, and you want to carry this forward and hopefully get to making impact. So as we close out these 2 days, and for some of you 3 days worth of coming together and thinking about how we're going to change the world and design for dignity and so on in an equitable way, hopefully what I'm going to do in this last session here is wrap up a little bit of what I've heard over these past few days in the time that I was here, tie it to a little bit about how this can empower us to go back and make that change and help be those seeds of innovation and designing for dignity within our communities and our circles. And then tie that to also showing hopefully a little bit of a commercial about the organization I work for, ONC. Thank you, Claudia, for the quick shout out earlier. But give you a sense of like how we are doing it as a federal government agency, because I know there's not a lot of government people here, a lot of former government, but not a lot of government people here in the room. And that'll give you a chance to learn a little bit about our organization, but also hopefully think about that in an abstract way of like, well, if they can do this, how can I apply some of these same techniques in the work that I do every day? Now, the reason why I changed the name, and Chris can attest to the fact that I turned this in like an hour ago, but the reason why that I changed the name to this, because somebody asked me at dinner last night, they said, you know, they were talking and they made the mistake of asking me, what are you working on that's interesting? And then for the next hour, I was making their ears bleed, telling them about all the things that I am, you know, truly passionate and proud about and persistent and kind of always trying to carry forward. And I think that those 3 Ps are actually a great example of if you want to try to get to making impact, if you're ensuring that you're always passionate about something, you're persistent in following through on trying to make sure that you don't just take no for an answer and you try to convince people that it's the right thing to do. And then of course, something that would make you proud to actually see materialize, you're going to find you will have some level of impact. Maybe on an individual, maybe an impact on your own life, but more than likely it's going to have an impact on a much broader community. So that's what I thought I'd title this today, because when they asked me this question, I had no problem answering the fact that I thought it was making an impact. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so passionate about the work. And I know so many of you, that's what you're here for, right? Because you believe in the things that you want to work on. So first, I have to do a quick commercial for my agency. Otherwise, it wouldn't allow me to be here. So I need to make sure, how many people here know who the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT is? It's okay if you don't. Okay, part of the reason why I have a job is to get out there and make sure people learn who it is, because it is one of those 3-letter agencies that people aren't as familiar with. So I'm going to go through a really quick primer on this and then get into the rest of what I wanted to cover. This is the evolution of health IT in the United States. Other countries around the world have similar types of arcs, and the grass is always greener. You know, the UK with their unified single healthcare system talks about, you know, the ways that they're jealous of the US, and then we say the same thing about them, and then we find out that they have just as many interoperability problems and so on. So it's always, you know, the grass is greener. There is no perfect system out there in the world, I can tell you that. There's a few that are maybe close. But it started in the early, in the 2004 era of the Bush administration with an executive order that said, we need to have a czar or somebody who can help coordinate across all of federal government how to start moving healthcare into more of a technological advanced industry. How can we adopt technology to improve the way that we do our work in healthcare, and then how can we also use that to drive better outcomes, better experiences, you know, better care, et cetera. Fast forward to 2009, the HITECH Act. This is where we started to actually grow into a real official agency with funding and staff that, you know, grew to a whopping, I think eventually we were around 180 to 200 employees, so we're very small for a federal agency. But that was where we started to partner with CMS on the Meaningful Use program and start to move the healthcare system for manila folders and filing cabinets onto electronic health records and into a digital format. And then there was a little bit of work on how do we make that information interoperable, but it wasn't really until the Cures Act where we really plugged a lot of the gaps and holes that were causing problems with information sharing in healthcare and putting forth a pathway on how we can start to be truly interoperable for all the right use cases. And then most recently we have HTI-1 and HTI-2 that we've been working on. These are a little bit like smaller bites at policy that help advance things, but I have no doubt there will be another large, maybe high-tech 2.0, you know, who knows what it'll be called. That'll kind of drive our next phase. But a good way to summarize this, even simpler, is we needed to get everything into a digital format because it was all paper. Pre-2007, 2008, I think it was less than 10% of all healthcare information, medical records, was in a digital format. It was all paper, right? And that's not that long ago if you think about it. Fast forward, you know, now we're in a place where over 90%, close to 100% of healthcare information, especially on traditional clinical settings, is in an electronic format. So check on that first box of getting it all digital. The second part was how do we make it interoperable and making sure that people in the right places for the right purposes, for coordination care, transitions in care, whatever it may be, empowering the patient to be involved in understanding their care. How can we make all that data interoperable? And we've done a really good job with that and been advancing forward in that as well. But if you look at any of our health IT strategies over this 15-year period or so, it was, and actually we just hit our 20th anniversary technically this year, but if you looked at any of those health IT strategies that we did every couple of years, it was always get it digital, make it interoperable, and then the third phase we always wanted to evolve into and spend most of our time, once it's all digital and once it's all interoperable, was how do we now realize the full potential of all the interoperable data? How do we use it to drive value? How do we use it to improve costs and improve quality of care, user experience on the clinician side, user experience on the patient side, et cetera. And that's hopefully where we're spending most of our time today. And that's why I think when we think about designing for dignity, where we have our biggest opportunity as a federal agency who coordinates health IT policy across the entire federal government, to lean in on this idea of dignity and equity and how can we make sure that we're leveraging all that data for the right purposes. So these are the areas that people think about ONC. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. They think of us as like electronic health records or standards development, certification program, et cetera. But just know that if it's healthcare data or healthcare technology, then we coordinate with the entire federal government on it, not just HHS. And I'll show you in a second here how big of a coordination effort that is. We work with state, local governments. We work with the public, private sector, you name it. We kind of coordinate the entire landscape. So for approximately 200 employees, it's a big task. These are the amount of federal agencies that we coordinate through the Federal Health IT Coordinating Council. It's approximately 40 federal agencies, 40. And you'll see on the left side, those are all the agencies that sit outside of healthcare and human services. My favorite one I love to point out is the United States Postal Service. And you're like, you mean the mail carrier? And yes, absolutely. Because if you think of how we do patient matching in the United States, we don't have a national patient identifier. There's actually legislation that prohibits us from even working on it. So until that gets solved or whatever, we do patient matching via probabilistic matching based on a couple of key data elements. One of those being address specification. And guess who sets data standards for address specifications? The United States Postal Service. So we actually partner with them, and they have a division who works on adapting address specifications specifically for healthcare. So just this one example that I always think is fun. Happy to talk about any of the other ones, whether it's NASA or TSA or anybody else, but I'd be happy to do that afterwards. And then, of course, all the usual suspects on the right side that we work with when it comes to health IT adoption and interoperability and utilization. But I wanted to highlight that we are just one part of a broader ecosystem. And I say we in the sense of not just ONC, but the federal government as a whole, right? It's not just federal government and state and local government. And Claudia was talking about this earlier and the work that she's done on a national scale, working in her times in the federal government. In fact, when I first started, she welcomed me into a couple of projects and helped get me involved in some of the initiatives she was running. And now she's carrying that forward even at a state level, as you heard her talk about. But there's so many other pieces to the puzzle and partners that come together to really, truly advance the work. And if you think about it, sometimes you might be playing a different instrument, whether that's as an individual or as your organization, and it might make a different sound because it's your perspective of everything. But when you put it all together and you realize you're all actually playing from the same sheet of music, it gets to a point where you realize like it is better when you work together. Sure, you can play, pick any song, with one instrument. but when you put it together with a full orchestra, then it really starts to resonate with people and have impact. So again, the beautiful part is when you can design a way and figure out an effort of how you bring together everybody in that ecosystem and put them on that same sheet of music. So this is, I'm gonna have a couple quotes for you today, hopefully not too many. But the idea is that we just spent the last 2 days coming here and learning a lot, being inspired. Maybe there's some technical skills about how to do certain design type activities, how to get into the weeds and think about dignity in the context of all of this. But it doesn't really matter if we don't realize that we need to give back and we need to give this and carry it forward into our own organizations and communities. It doesn't really matter if you sat here and listened all day and said, that was great, and you just talked about it. It matters and it has impact when you go back into your organizations and you start to plant those seeds and be that champion for watering those seeds, right? And understanding people, helping them understand the ways that they can help bring dignity into the work that they're doing. So again, it realized that it really isn't just you, that there are other people who've laid this work for you. Chris and Amy obviously have provided the forum for you to come together and start to learn this. And then you need to carry that forward as well and put in just as much effort as you've been able to receive from it. Now, as far as what's ONC doing in this vein, and like how can I say that we are walking the walk and talking the talk and doing our part, it might be a little abstract for you to think of how can federal government really design for equity or design for dignity. And in this context, I would challenge you to think of a broader terminology for or definition of the word design. So how many people here are UX designers? Okay, I figured there'd be a good amount. How many here consider themselves like a product designer? Okay, which has a piece to UX. How many people are a policy designer? Right, or a strategic plan designer. Okay, program designer, you build programs and launches them. Okay, there's a lot of different ways you can think about the word design, and if you're designing for dignity, it's not just in the user experience, right, or the actual tangible product that somebody picks up and uses, or the website they go to, or the algorithm that you might be building. It's also in every other aspect, and in government, we do policy. Yes, we also develop sometimes resources that we want our stakeholders to use, a development tool or something like that to help them test their products and so on. We put out the Health IT Playbook that I was talking with somebody about yesterday, and we designed it in a way that would be very easy to digest and understand and be usable. But we design policy primarily, and we launch big public-private partnerships and things like that. And we have a responsibility to try to think about the context of the immense power and leverage we have through policy making and through program development at a federal level. The fact that we can kind of create that call to action or plant seeds in a broader community's mind about like this is a signal of an important issue that everybody should be taking on. So when we think about dignity, one of the first things that I came to mind about how we were doing our part in trying to contribute to that is most recently we put out a Health Equity by Design concept paper. And the word design's in there because of the fact that we mean it should be in all things, just like we do privacy and security by design when we're building technology and thinking about how can you make sure it's secure. The same way we need to be thinking about as we build and launch our initiatives, our policies, our programs, how can we bake equity into that? And of course you could extend that to relating to people being able to remain their own dignity. So I'm going to highlight a couple examples where we've tried to actually embed equity into our work. So you'll hear it in a few places, but feel free to check this out. Give public feedback and let us know if you think we're missing something. It is going to be more focused on like data and standard certification because that is like 80% of what we do. But I think you'll see some of the other examples I'm giving because I'm an innovation guy at ONC. You'll see it's not just in our data work and so on. So talking earlier about planting those seeds in the organizations, if you go back, I don't know, how many people here do their own landscaping or have some form of like growing gardens or plants in their condo, whatever it is. So my wife and I, we enjoy doing our own landscaping at our house. And every spring it's kind of, and actually it's all year, but really like in the spring is the heavy lift. And it comes down to a point where we argue, or not argue, but debate over who has to do the weeding. Because it's like the least fun part. But there's a lot of other things. Since we always come to kind of a battle and she ends up usually doing the weeding. But nonetheless, it's a realization of like, first you have to think about mapping out what the landscape should look like, right? What is your plan? What do you want to grow over here? How do you want the back of your yard to look, and so on. So you have to kind of plan at a systems level, a big picture level, what do you want the overall thing to look like, right? And think about that with the end in mind. But then as you get to work on it, you can't just ignore the weeds. right? You can't ignore even the dead plants that are there, and the other roots that might get in the way of having that perfectly edged garden or whatever it may be. If you want it to grow and thrive, you can't just plant the seeds. You have to make sure you're tackling those challenges and those problems, those issues that are buried deep in the weeds and underneath that aren't on the surface. You need to make sure that you're doing something to get them out, not just on a surface level clipping them, but really getting to the root causes and pulling them out. So again, it's a matter of like, are you willing to roll up your sleeves and get into the weeds on that? And I heard that yesterday when we first did the breakouts in the morning. I know my group that I was part of, we were thinking at a systems level. How can we put into place kind of a designing for dignity roadmap as part of a care plan for an elderly individual, and thinking about all the different places we can ensure that their dignity is going to be maintained. So we were thinking about an intervention at a systems level that then can be applicable in a lot of places. But a lot of the rest of you really spent the majority of your time, you didn't get to that end project, right? You were focusing all in the weeds and really got in there, even more so than our group did. And I commend you for that. Because you have to do that, right? You have to understand what are those issues that are going to ultimately strangle out the rest of your garden, right? So this is an example of getting in the weeds on the technical side. And I promised Chris I'd hit on the topic of AI. So, because, it's what you have to do at every conference nowadays. But we've really taken the charge at ONC, and this wasn't written into our mandate as far as thou shalt manage all AI, coordination across government. It just says healthcare technology. And for years, a lot of people thought that AI was FDA's domain, right, when it came to healthcare, because they're thinking of it in a limited scope of clinical decision support, right? Does this algorithm or this particular piece of technology do what it claims to do when it comes to the clinical outcomes, the clinical efficacy of it, right? Can a doctor rely upon that to make some kind of a diagnosis or prescribe some kind of intervention? But we've now learned that through a lot of studies that have come out of the University of Chicago and Duke and numerous other places, that there's a lot of other problems with the applications of AI in healthcare that go beyond just the clinical decision support side of the house. There's administrative transactions and tools that are being used. There's one study, anybody here heard of Zayed Obermeyer? He does the conference circuit, so he's out there. Look him up. He has done a number of really interesting research studies in partnership with others, including University of Chicago. He's produced some. But there was one study that they did analyzing scheduling tools, right? Not clinical, scheduling tools. And in that scheduling tool, it was discovered that it was having a disparate outcome for different patients based on certain demographics, where they were either having their appointments canceled more frequently on them when they would double book. It was, for instance, African-American patients were being canceled and rescheduled further out because the algorithm told them historically that there's more problems with that, right? Like their likelihood of them canceling or being a no-show is higher, so therefore, based on the data that they trained it on, we'll go ahead and cancel them first because they're probably not going to show up, or at least not as much as another one. Obviously, that's false, and obviously that is something that is based on a limited data set that's not truly representative of like the overall ecosystem, and it's not fair, right? And think of the dignity impact that has on that patient who maybe does have problems or challenges getting to that healthcare center because of the community they live in and the status they're at. And they actually make it there, and now they're being told, guess what, you can't. They might have lost a day's worth of pay. They might have to jump through all kinds of hoops, had to pay for childcare, and they get there and they're being told, no, you have to go home, come back in 3 weeks. And on average, that they're being scheduled further out. So that's unacceptable. And there's no guardrails that were currently in place to help identify that issue of bias and discrimination that was coming through that scheduling tool. So we've really leaned in to try to put forth a new kind of framework here, and this is I love simple frameworks that are easy to remember, but FAVES is the, hopefully you take this home with you today, is it fair, effective, fair, appropriate, valid, effective, and safe. And that's what I think anybody who's looking to evaluate an algorithm before they deploy it, as they go to test and so on, they should be checking all these boxes at every given sense. So when applying this, we thought not only what can we do in our coordination role across federal government, working with FDA and others to try to put full guardrails in place to help support transparency, but also accountability and trust in the use of these algorithms, whether they're on the administrative side or the clinical side. We started to think about what could we do individually at ONC. Now we regulate and certify electronic health records. In that, we can compel EHR vendors like Epic and Oracle and others to make this kind of information available to anybody who's purchasing it. So we're not saying that algorithm is good, the government has blessed it. like FDA kind of does with the clinical side of tools. But we're just saying that people should have the right amount of information, the transparency of that information readily available before they make a decision to adopt it, deploy it, test it, et cetera. And so now we're compelling this kind of information through our HTI-1 rule to be tracked in for any tool that's built by an EHR developer or delivered in partnership through them. Now there's still other tools that are going to be outside of that, but we hope this has a nudging effect on the entire industry, that there's a certain level of expectation that this kind of data is available. Otherwise, what are you hiding and why should I work with you, right? We also put out, working with AHRQ and a bunch of other partners, both internal to federal government as well as external. I helped contribute to this as well. I'm proud of that. I'm one of the Ps. But putting forth kind of a guide of how people can roll out some of these checks and balances at an enterprise level for ensuring that they're mitigating against potential for algorithmic bias in the tools that they're rolling out. Feel free to check it out. It's on JAMA Open Network, and hopefully, I don't know if we're going to email these out, but there's hyperlinks too. But you should be able to find it pretty easily. And that just came out not that long ago, this last December. It's a very short read, very easy. You can share it with your groups. It doesn't matter about the setting. The other in the weeds part is the data piece. It's not always about the data, but the data definitely plays a big role. The limited access to good, truly representative, fully comprehensive data to train these algorithms, performance data on the algorithms, et cetera. And so in the Cures Act, we had to advance the US CDI Plus, which is US core data for interoperability. This is the new foundation. It is the law of the land of what kind of data has to be available in a consistent way through all electronic health records, certified health IT products. In this, we continually evolve it. From version 1, when we first released that and proposed it, available consistently in a similar format, classified in a similar way across all electronic health record vendors, which aren't the only data node, but let's be honest, they're a significant one and probably the largest. Hopefully will help drive and fuel innovation and evaluation and the ability to see, are you having an impact on certain populations in different ways? Can you test an algorithm to see, is it impacting different populations in a different way? The other thing is, nobody told us to do this, but we stepped up and we said, let's take it a step further. We decided to launch our own streaming service, US CDI Plus, like all the other streaming services that are out there, and I say that jokingly. But the idea is that there are some areas where there's a lack of maturity in data standards in certain nuanced affinity areas that often have challenges with equity and high healthcare disparities and hit certain populations differently. And that's where you do see a lot of these issues of dignity. And so we decided to launch this, and we work with other federal partners to advance maturing data in these areas. And it is all voluntary to be adopted, but I can use the example of US CDI Plus for cancer right now. We had a White House meeting this past December where we got 8 of the largest healthcare vendors, Epic and Oracle and McKesson and Meditech and Flatiron and TimeCare and a bunch of others that are working in the oncology field, all committed to adopting and rolling out US CDI Plus for cancer as we're building it. They're putting out available APIs this year to have that data be consistent across all platforms on a voluntarily basis to help support reporting for CMMI's EOM program, or an enhancing oncology model. But the idea here is, it's a demand signal that is unified now, and the developers can say, yeah, I'll roll it into my development because I know that that's what everybody's going to ask for me versus the one-off requests, and they can't really, they have to do custom builds and so on. But behavioral health, maternal health, and public health, I think, are 3 ones that will have a huge impact as we evolve those towards being able to deal with dignity in different ways. I know there's some people from Chicago here. Anybody know who this is? The name's right there. Miriam Kaba, great community organizer in Chicago, and has written a book and all kinds of great things. But the idea is that you have to figure out who's going to be part of your tribe, or what tribe are you part of, right? And how can you join that, and how can you ultimately leverage not just the role that you can play and the little seeds you can plant, but how can you work together to put together that full garden, right? And so the quote here is that nothing that we do is worthwhile is done alone. And I mentioned to someone last night about how I always wanted to start off a keynote or something by saying, I've done nothing meaningful in my career, at least not by myself, right? And that's the idea, because I really haven't. Like, on my own, there is nothing that I've done that I felt had any impact or has any kind of, any piece of something I should be proud of. Everything that I've done with people and other organizations and partnerships, and usually the bigger that partnership is things that I'm extremely proud of and things that have the best chance for sustaining and are still available today. So figure out who is going to go ahead and help carry that banner for you. Cancer X is an example. I'm going to fly through this. I bragged about this because I am proud about it a lot yesterday. So if I talk to you, apologies for you hearing about it again. But look it up. Go to cancerx.health. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. The idea was the Cancer Moonshot created a call to action. I saw an opportunity to launch my 5th public-private partnership around the field of cancer and found my tribe, right? We found 2 partners to launch it. We had that 3-legged stool. It was Digital Medicine Society, Moffitt Cancer Center, and then the federal government. We announced and launched it. 30 to 60 days later, had 90 organizations sign on as members and cut checks to be part of it. Fast forward today, just a year and a half later, we now have 176 organizations. Go to the website, you'll see all the names that you recognize and some that you won't, but you'll find out they're amazing as well. And they've all come together. The Startup Accelerator is just the middle piece of it. We're currently in the first cohort. We've got 16 startups that are amazing. They're getting access to investment, to cancer centers, to mentors, to all kinds of curriculum and programming, federal agencies, et cetera. But none of this would have happened if we didn't have all these people who came together and decided. Tying it back to the dignity and equity piece, and thank you, Chris, for giving me a few extra minutes here, and practicing what we preach when we talk about health equity by design, bringing it back to before, how do we do this in all programs, right? And it's not just about data. In this program, we made sure that any application reviewer for the Startup Accelerator, who was judging the over 100 applications we got in from startups throughout the country, had to go through anti-bias training. And this is something that I learned from another Startup Accelerator part of, Mass Challenge, not too far down the road from here, who we partnered with on a couple of other accelerators. And in that effort, the idea is that sometimes the brightest or best or ones with the most opportunity who are building a solution that are custom made for their own community or a certain population, right, with those cultural sensitivities in mind and so on, don't even make it into the accelerator program, don't have the access to then scale on all the partnerships because there's bias that presents by the reviewer or the application reviewer, right? They're thinking, they won't be successful, or that's too limited in scope. And so there's anti-bias training that we made sure we put into that to make sure that everybody had a fair chance of getting in on the merits of the quality of their idea and their product. The second thing we did, the application process for the startups. We made sure that there was 2 questions, but one of them I'm going to feature on. We're cutting across, and it was kind of like a bonus question to kind of give them a little extra bonus, was how are they designing their tool or their business in order to take into consideration its equity implications, right? How is it either going to potentially reduce inequities that exist in those communities or potentially help advance better equity, right? And then every startup, all 100 plus who filled out an application, turned it in, had to answer that question. Now, sure, some of them will BS that, right? And you can kind of see that as you read through it. But it's forcing them to think about it, right? And the government, through its programs, can have these nice little nudges into a broader ecosystem to say, like, thinking about health equity is important. We put it as a question on there, and we got some really great responses. But it's just an example of some ways that you can, not in an obvious way, but build in these ideas and thoughts about equity. So from here, just wrapping it up, the idea is hopefully you're all going to go back to your organizations, to your communities, to your teams, and get to work, right? It doesn't matter if we just sit here and think about it and talk about it all day. It doesn't matter if you say, wow, that was great. This is, tell your friends about the fun you had or how you got to do all this creative kind of touchy-feely work. But the idea is how do you take what you learned and then pass it on throughout your organizations and you get to work, right? The future depends on what you do today, completely true. But really, this other one on the ounce of action is worth a ton of theory. We could talk about it all you want, but if you don't start putting it into action, then it's not going to have any kind of impact. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you for indulging me for the last, 20 or 30 minutes. And hopefully I'll get to partner and work with you all in the future. Have a great day.